I am Camilla Butler, 15, the inconvenient daughter, dropped off at my Aunt Margaret's Boston home with 2 suitcases and silence. For 19 years, they never looked back. Then, the press reported Aunt Margaret's $20 million inheritance, and suddenly, they were back. Edward and Vanessa, my biological parents, appeared, grinning wide, as if nothing happened. My father leaned forward, eyes gleaming, and said, "We'll guide you through this." Was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or just the first line of a new, even more manipulative chapter? I was born in New York. The only child of Edward and Vanessa Sterling, a couple who defined their worth by their zip code and their social performance. My father, a high-rolling investment manager, and my mother, a social climber. We lived a lavish, performative life. Nostalgia isn't always warm. Sometimes it's just the memory of a beautiful, expensive lie. The performance collapsed when Edward's high-risk, unethical investments crashed. I was 13. Their lavish life became openly hostile. I became the inconvenient truth in their narrative of success. Their solution wasn't facing bankruptcy in New York, it was simply changing the stage and erasing the child that tied them to the mess. They thought they were leaving me with a babysitter, but they were actually giving me to the only person who ever truly saw me, Aunt Margaret. What did this quiet, disciplined commercial real estate developer see in me that my own parents refused to acknowledge? I grew up valuing precision and truth, the hallmarks of a great editor. My sanctuary wasn't revenge, but competence. I channeled the chaos of my past into control over language, becoming a respected senior editor at a prominent Boston publishing house. Fixing stories gave me the power to impose order on chaos. I learned that a well-placed deletion can save an entire narrative. My late aunt's estate became the final proof that love chosen freely outweighs blood ties. The inheritance was less about wealth and more about protection, a fortress Margaret built to ensure I was untouchable. Their abandonment, meant to crush me, had inadvertently secured my future beyond their reach. My life became a testament. I was the editor of my own fate. And their chapter was non-essential. They thought they were coming back for a simple cash grab, but they didn't realize they were walking into a battle against my carefully constructed reality. How would they react when the editor in charge refused to publish their redemption story? 19 years of silent healing was channeled into one skill, editing. Fixing other people's stories became my sanctuary. It gave me control over the chaos my parents had left behind. Every grammatical error corrected, every redundant word deleted, was a small, quiet victory over my past. My career wasn't a job, it was my therapy, my path to genuine, earned peace. I had perfected my inner world, but my quiet victory was about to be interrupted. How would I react when the 2 people who created the original mess showed up, demanding I edit their flawed new business proposal? I was deep in an editorial review when the door burst open. Not a call, not an email. Edward and Vanessa suddenly visited my Boston publishing office, pretending it was a charming reunion. They completely ignored my professional boundaries. Vanessa gushed about my work, calling my latest article brilliant. It was purely performative. I felt the cold wave of intrusion wash over my hard-won sanctuary. The facade cracked quickly. Edward didn't waste time. He immediately pitched their next big thing, a global investment venture that required seed capital. Vanessa, ever the social climber, suggested I use Aunt Margaret's funds to publish her own poorly written, self-help vanity book. Manipulation lay beneath every practiced smile, every faux compliment. They didn't see me, the editor, they saw the money, the opportunity. They had invaded my workspace and insulted my intelligence. But I had spent 2 decades mastering the art of the poker face. Could I maintain my cool professional demeanor, or would their toxic greed finally force me to drop the red pen and rewrite their fate entirely? Despite the blatant manipulation, I remained professional. I listened politely, offering no emotional reaction, only polite, neutral questions about the structure of their business proposal. Their voices grew louder, their gestures more insistent, trying to drag me into their familiar spiral of chaos. But my emotional armor, built over 19 years of silence, kept me firmly grounded. I meticulously documented every word, every meeting, and every suspicious request, not out of bitterness, but for legal precision. This wasn't personal, it was evidence. My father, Edward, mistook my calm for vulnerability. He assumed I was still the broken 15-year-old. He didn't realize that in the absence of their love, I had mastered the art of observation and self-preservation. They were growing desperate, and their desperation led to a familiar cruelty. What stinging personal attack did my father unleash when he realized his usual manipulative tactics weren't working on the editor he abandoned? Edward, frustrated by my lack of reaction and my focus on logic over emotion, decided to go for the low blow. He sneered, looking around my sophisticated Boston office. He couldn't attack my competence, so he attacked my chosen path. "You fix other people's stories," he said, the contempt clear in his voice, "but you can't even fix your own family's financial mess." The words stung, they were designed to. They were his final attempt to reduce me back to the broken 15-year-old who craved his approval. Vanessa quickly chimed in, suggesting editing was just hobby work. I took a deep breath. I reminded myself of Margaret's lesson: words can only wound you if you let them rewrite your truth. I closed their portfolio proposal, giving them a final, editorially crisp rejection. "The only mess I'm fixing now is the financial one my aunt spent years protecting me from," I replied, my voice steady. They wanted recognition for the 2 decades they ignored. They wanted me to validate their neglect. But I was the senior editor, and their content was being rejected. Their final attack had failed. The stage was set for the legal showdown at the Four Seasons. But my lawyer, Aunt Margaret's trusted counsel, had a quiet surprise for me, a sealed folder that would change the legal definition of my family forever. What powerful, final edit did Margaret leave behind, ensuring their toxic chapter could be completely deleted? The day before the showdown at the Four Seasons, I met with Arthur Jenkins, Aunt Margaret's trusted attorney. He had known me since I was 15, he was the one who quietly filed the guardianship papers. We weren't just discussing the trust, we were discussing the legacy of love. His presence was a rock of quiet stability, a stark contrast to my parents' performative chaos. Mr. Jenkins finished reviewing my meticulously documented evidence against my parents. Then, he paused. Quietly, he slid across the mahogany table a sealed manila folder. The title, handwritten by Margaret herself, read, "Camilla's Final Chapter Edit." My heart pounded. It wasn't about money. It was about something far more profound. Something that would change my legal identity forever. It was the real gift she had left behind. I clutched the folder, the weight of that sealed document feeling heavier than the entire $20 million. What powerful legal move had Aunt Margaret orchestrated years ago that would ensure Edward and Vanessa could never lay claim to her legacy, or to me? That night, with the sealed folder sitting on my desk, I pulled out Aunt Margaret's old letters. I needed her voice before the storm. One line, penned years ago, stood out: "You were never left behind, Camilla, you were chosen." The sting of my parents' abandonment finally dulled. It wasn't about surviving their neglect, it was about honoring Margaret's intentional, unconditional love. The adoption papers, whatever they were, didn't feel like a weapon for revenge, they felt like protection. Margaret had given me the ultimate defense, proof that my true family was defined by love and presence, not biological chance. It confirmed my core belief: I am loved with intention. That realization fortified me completely for the meeting ahead. I was no longer fighting with empty hands, I held a truth stronger than any bank account. How would my parents, who only understood the language of money, react when confronted with a legal document that spoke only the language of love? The scheduled family law meeting at the Four Seasons loomed. The night before, I meticulously reviewed my evidence: 14 years of zero contact, no financial support, and documented correspondence where they explicitly declined responsibility. It was a brutal timeline, but necessary. Every document was a sentence in the final, damning paragraph of their story. I wasn't seeking revenge, I was demanding accountability. I chose my attire carefully: a sharp, professional suit, the uniform of a senior editor and a successful property owner. I needed to project composure. Most importantly, I fastened Aunt Margaret's silver key pendant around my neck. It was her symbol for the trust fund. But for me, it was my silent shield. It was a reminder that the home they abandoned me from was the one that ultimately protected me. As I walked into the Four Seasons, the anxiety was a dull hum beneath my focus. Edward and Vanessa, I knew, would arrive in designer clothes, ready to put on a show of grief and familial love. They'd use every emotional trick they knew. But they were walking into a room I controlled, where the only language spoken was legal fact, not emotional fiction. Mr. Jenkins and I were ready. The meticulously documented evidence was laid out, along with the sealed folder containing Margaret's final act. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about defining my identity on my own terms, and ensuring my parents' names were irrevocably and legally removed from the title of family. It was time for the final, definitive edit. The door opened, and they swaggered in, oozing false confidence. They came prepared with business proposals. I came prepared with 14 years of their absence and a legal document that would permanently end their claim to my life. What happened when Edward realized he had finally met a text he couldn't manipulate, and a legal chapter he couldn't delete? They strode into the private room at the Four Seasons, dressed in designer labels I recognized from their good old days. Edward carried a sleek portfolio of business plans, Vanessa, a box of tissues for her inevitable performance. They refused to sit until I acknowledged them with a hug. I didn't move. They were playing the family reunion scene, but I was the director, and I cut the line. The meeting began. Edward started with a long, rambling monologue about the bond of blood and how their overseas move was a temporary sacrifice for the family's greater good. Vanessa dabbed her eyes unnecessarily. Then came the demand: joint control of the inheritance, claiming it was what a loving family must share. I let them finish their theatrical performance. Then, Mr. Jenkins opened his file. Before he could speak, I broke the silence myself. My voice was calm, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion, cutting through the tension like a glass shard. Family doesn't vanish for 19 years, I stated, looking straight at Edward. Family doesn't require an inheritance announcement to contact their child. Edward's face flashed with pure rage. He wasn't used to being edited. He tried to interrupt, but I kept going, using the evidence Mr. Jenkins laid out. I presented their letters of refusal, their non-payment of child support, their intentional abandonment. I was no longer the abandoned girl, I was the senior editor, fact-checking their entire existence, rewriting their false narrative right in front of them. Vanessa started crying, a sudden, loud, theatrical breakdown. "How can you be so cruel, Camilla?" she sobbed. "We are your flesh and blood." My lawyer, silent until now, shook his head subtly. Her tears held no true regret, only the fear of losing the money. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. But the script was too old, and the audience, and me, was utterly unimpressed. Edward was about to shout a final protest when Mr. Jenkins finally broke his silence. He reached for the sealed manila folder I had brought. What happened to my parents' smug confidence when the lawyer presented the official document that legally proved their most fundamental claim, the claim of being my family, was completely invalid? Edward roared, interrupting Vanessa's theatrics. He demanded I show respect, calling Margaret's estate ill-gotten money that rightfully belonged to his bloodline. He tried to frame me as an ungrateful child, controlled by the old lady. His fury was loud, but it sounded empty and desperate in the quiet professionalism of the room. I simply looked at him. I finally spoke, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it silenced the room completely. "You want to talk about family?" I asked, letting the question hang heavy in the air. "You forfeited that title 19 years ago." I presented the documented timeline of their silence, using my evidence folder. It was a precise, journalistic takedown of their parental claims, based purely on factual absence. I made a conscious effort to stop referring to them as mother or father. I used their full names, Edward and Vanessa Sterling. It stripped them of their assumed authority, their pretense of having control over me. Edward slammed his fist on the mahogany table. "The blood bond is unbreakable," he shouted, his desperation turning into a public spectacle. I gently tapped the silver key pendant around my neck, my silent shield. My calm was infuriating to them. "Blood is biology, Edward. Family is choice." This was the core of my argument, the truth Margaret had taught me, refined over 2 decades. Their control over me was an illusion they desperately clung to. But the facts were about to dismantle it forever. I nodded to Mr. Jenkins. He finally moved, sliding a large, bound document towards them. It wasn't the sealed folder yet, it was the legal trust document, detailing the ironclad stipulations and tax implications Margaret had designed specifically to keep Edward's unscrupulous hands off the assets. The money, legally, was entirely out of their reach. Vanessa, seeing the complex legal language and the grim look on her own lawyer's face, visibly slumped. "We just want to guide you," she whined one last, hollow time. Edward glared at me, malice and defeat in his eyes. "You think you've won," he snarled. "We still have the moral right, the blood right." He still didn't grasp the true nature of the small, sealed folder. Mr. Jenkins was now slowly, dramatically, sliding across the table. Edward was clinging to the blood right, unaware that Margaret had planned for this exact, desperate moment years in advance. What shocking legal transformation was contained in that final sealed folder that would strip them not just of the money, but of their entire legal claim to my identity? Edward snarled about his blood right, completely missing the quiet professionalism of Mr. Jenkins. The lawyer ignored him, picking up the sealed manila folder, Camilla's final chapter edit, and slowly, deliberately, broke the seal. The sound echoed in the room, a sharp crack of finality. Edward and Vanessa watched, smug, convinced it was just another tax document. Mr. Jenkins didn't speak. He simply extracted one page, a crisp, official certificate, and gently slid it across the table, stopping directly in front of Edward. The title was bold and undeniable, Adoption Record. Edward's smug smile evaporated instantly. His eyes widened into shocked saucers, reading the names, Margaret Butler. "And me." Vanessa gasped, a strangled, panicked sound, and snatched the document. Her hands trembled violently as she scanned the official signatures. What is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking, not from sorrow, but from the sudden, terrifying realization that their claims were not just morally defunct, but legally nullified. I leaned forward, my silver key pendant catching the light, and gave my final, editing note on their existence. My voice was victorious, yet calm. "It's the end of your chapter," I replied. Margaret hadn't just secured the money, she had secured my identity, removing their ability to exert any legal or emotional control over me. Edward grabbed the paper from Vanessa, his face a mask of impotent rage. Mr. Jenkins explained the date. The adoption was finalized years ago. Their abandonment was a legal relinquishment of all parental rights. They didn't leave an inconvenience, they legally signed away a $20 million lottery ticket. The room fell utterly silent. The silence was absolute. Their blood right, the last weapon they clung to, was officially rendered obsolete. But as Edward's desperate rage turned to cold, dangerous malice, would the legal victory be enough to truly end their toxic pursuit of the money? or was this only the beginning of their final, ugly backlash? Edward didn't rage. He crumpled. The realization hit him: he hadn't just abandoned an inconvenient daughter, he had legally forfeited the daughter who inherited $20 million. His face went white. It wasn't grief I saw, but the terrifying understanding of his own colossal, irreversible financial mistake. He had played a high-stakes gamble and lost his most valuable asset. Vanessa's panic instantly shifted to cold, calculated anger directed at her husband. "You signed the papers, Edward. You said it was just a formality to shut Margaret up." Her voice was shrill, laying bare the truth of their negligence and complete disregard for me as a human being. They hadn't even read the small print. Their desperation for money had blinded them completely. Mr. Jenkins confirmed the legal reality: Margaret, through the adoption, had severed their parental rights and, crucially, their inheritance claim. "There is no legal basis for Edward or Vanessa Sterling to challenge the trust," he stated with finality. The room was no longer filled with the language of manipulation, but the cold, hard certainty of law. The revenge wasn't mine, it was Margaret's quiet, long-planned justice. I felt a sudden, profound lightness. Not the bitter joy of revenge, but the catharsis of closure. They were no longer my burden. The strings they thought connected us, blood, obligation, guilt, were officially cut. I stood up, the silver key pendant hanging free. I was Camilla Butler, Margaret's daughter, the editor of my own unblemished story. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. My lawyer gave Edward and Vanessa the necessary paperwork for their copies, and I simply walked out. I left them in the silent, expensive conference room, trapped in the wreckage of their own avarice and their own unforgivable abandonment. Their only inheritance was the bitter taste of regret. I walked out of that room a free woman, leaving their toxic drama behind. The legal battle was over, but the emotional journey was just beginning. How did I learn to fully embrace my new identity, and what did I finally do with the money that Margaret intended to be a foundation, not a weapon? I didn't look back as I left the Four Seasons. The victory wasn't sweet, it was quiet and final. The adoption papers were not revenge, they were liberation. Margaret's ultimate gift was not wealth, but the freedom to define myself. I had legally deleted the toxic chapter. My life immediately regained its intentional rhythm. I returned to my senior editor desk, finding profound peace in the precision of language and the order of a manuscript. I wasn't fixing my family's mess anymore, I was building my future. My greatest success was the solitude and the realization that I was enough. The $20 million was a huge burden, but I honored Margaret's intent. I established the Margaret Butler Foundation for the Arts, providing scholarships for overlooked young writers. The money became a fountain, not a fortress. It was a testament to the love that chose me, transforming financial greed into creative opportunity. I realized Margaret's love was never possessive. She simply edited my life, replacing a broken narrative with a foundational truth: family is choice, not an obligation enforced by biology. The true definition of family was found in the quiet loyalty of Mr. Jenkins and the memory of Margaret's unconditional acceptance. My parents faded quickly, unable to survive outside the spotlight. I stand in Margaret's garden now, the silver key pendant a constant reminder. Home is not where you are from, but where you are understood and valued. My story ends not with revenge, but with peace. My story is proof that the greatest act of revenge is simply living well without them. Have you ever had to rewrite your own story after betrayal? And what did you learn about the true meaning of family along the way? Edward refused to accept the adoption record. He ripped the paper, calling it a forgery and threatening to sue the state of Massachusetts. "You were my child. We never agreed to this," he screamed, his face an alarming shade of crimson. His reaction wasn't paternal, it was the fury of a businessman who had been swindled out of a massive investment. His lawyer had to physically restrain him. The denial was desperate, yet utterly pathetic. Vanessa, in contrast, started sobbing, not for me, but for the life she had lost. The Hamptons house, the cruises, it was all tied up in Margaret's assets, she wailed, tears streaming down her carefully preserved face. It was the final, honest confession. There was no pretense of affection, only transactional disappointment. Her tears were pure gold-digger grief, and I felt nothing but contempt. The adoption was processed years ago after you explicitly signed documents waiving all parental rights and financial obligations, I stated, my voice clinical. Mr. Jenkins displayed their signed letters of refusal to pay child support. You legally abandoned me to protect your assets from creditors. Margaret simply formalized the emotional truth you had already established. They had nothing to argue against the cold reality of their own signatures. Cornered, Edward launched his last personal attack. You think you're better than us with your little book reports and your dead aunt's money? You're still just the timid, awkward girl we left behind. The venom was meant to wound me, to crack my composure. But the words were weightless. I was wearing the impenetrable armor of a woman who had fought to define her own worth. I met his glare. You are right, Edward. I am not you. And your abandonment cost you precisely $20 million. Margaret, in her wisdom, ensured that the moment you severed the bond, you also severed the reward. I made the financial consequences explicit, turning their greed into their punishment. The silence that followed was the sound of a complete financial execution. I stood up, adjusting the collar of my suit. My name is Camilla Butler. I am Margaret's daughter. You are Edward and Vanessa Sterling. And effective today, you are legally nothing more than footnotes in a dismissed probate filing. I gathered my papers, the adoption certificate secured. I deleted them from my life, not with rage, but with a definitive stroke of the editorial pen. Even the Sterling's own slick lawyer, who had been scrambling through his papers, finally threw up his hands. He leaned in and whispered something sharp to Edward, likely advising him to cease and desist immediately. Edward looked at his own counsel with raw hatred. The external validation of their utter defeat was the final humiliation. Before I walked out, I offered one last, cutting statement. I didn't direct it at them, but towards the empty space between them. You didn't lose a daughter today. You lost an asset. And the reason you lost is simple. You failed to read the fine print on the one transaction that mattered. That was the harshest truth. They were bad parents and failed investors. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them with Mr. Jenkins to deal with the procedural wreckage. I left behind the fury, the manipulation, and the toxic burden of their existence. Stepping out into the crisp Boston air, I felt the sun on my face. The revenge wasn't the pain they felt, it was the peace I finally earned. They were left with their greed, their regret, and the final, crushing knowledge that their abandonment was the most expensive financial mistake of their lives. What happens to Edward and Vanessa after the cameras stop rolling? And how does the peace I found become my most valuable and enduring inheritance? I walked out of the Four Seasons and straight into the Boston Public Garden. The cold air was a relief after the toxic heat of that room. I needed to breathe the air of freedom. I wasn't celebrating a victory, I was accepting a new reality. The paperwork was done, the tie was cut, and for the first time in my life, I was entirely responsible for my own emotional landscape. Back in my quiet apartment, I hung my professional suit and carefully placed the adoption certificate in a safe box. I took a moment to hold Margaret's silver key pendant. It wasn't just a reminder of the money, it was the symbol of the unconditional love that chose me. My solitude felt intentional, not imposed. I had successfully edited the most damaging part of my life story. I knew Edward and Vanessa would attempt one last, desperate legal maneuver, they couldn't accept the loss of $20 million. But their power over me was gone. They had lost the only thing they truly valued, control over an asset. They were now just two figures fading into the distance, relegated to a footnote in my revised history. The legal battle was done, but a quiet fear lingered. Even after this total defeat, would my parents' toxic obsession with the money ever truly end? How did I ensure their final, inevitable attempts to contact me were met with the same cold, legal finality as the adoption papers? The calm was short-lived. Predictably, Edward tried one final, desperate maneuver, an emotional appeal. I received a long email, dripping with self-pity, claiming the adoption was a misunderstanding and that they still deserved a share for emotional damages. They were trying to edit my life again, but they no longer had the password. I didn't respond. I simply forwarded the entire rambling thread to Mr. Jenkins with the subject line, footnote. Please file appropriately. I realized the power was now in my silence. Every word I gave them was a potential entry point for manipulation. My life as an editor taught me that the best response is often deletion. Edward escalated. He contacted my magazine's HR, claiming I was withholding family documents and using my position improperly. My boss, knowing the full truth from Mr. Jenkins, laughed it off. Their attempts to sabotage me only solidified my colleagues' respect. Then came Vanessa's final attempt, an unannounced visit to my Boston apartment building. She stood outside the entrance, clutching a bouquet of cheap, wilted roses, playing the grieving mother for the security camera. I watched the live feed on my phone. She was still performing for an audience that no longer existed. I immediately called building security and provided Mr. Jenkins' contact information, instructing them to handle any further attempts as trespassing. No drama. No words, just a decisive, legal boundary. I had learned that true closure doesn't require a conversation, it requires an immovable barrier. They couldn't understand that the money was irrelevant to my peace. They only saw a prize they were still entitled to. Their actions reinforced Margaret's wisdom. Their relationship with me was purely transactional. And once the transaction was legally blocked, the relationship had no foundation left to stand on. The tension finally subsided not with a bang, but with a whimper of legal advice and ignored emails. I went back to funding the Margaret Butler Foundation and editing great literature. My success wasn't the millions, it was the ability to rewrite the most tragic chapter of my life into a story of resilience and chosen family. Mr. Jenkins sent one final, two-sentence letter, a legal cease and desist order citing the finalized adoption and previous abandonment waivers. It was the last, definitive punctuation mark. My life with Edward and Vanessa Sterling was over, signed, sealed, and delivered by the U.S. Postal Service. My new life was one of intentional silence and chosen purpose. But the silence begged one question: what happens to Edward and Vanessa, those who only value gold, when they realize their most valuable possession was the daughter they legally discarded? Looking out over the city lights, I finally understood the distinction. My parents demanded the obedience due to blood, Margaret offered the love due to choice. The adoption wasn't a trick, it was Margaret acknowledging my truth. I was her daughter long before the law formalized it. I embraced the title, Camilla Butler. It was a name I had earned, signed into existence not by biological chance, but by an act of profound, intentional love. The inheritance was merely the foundation, the true legacy was the sense of belonging and the clear, clean separation from the people who had defined me by their neglect. The silence from Edward and Vanessa wasn't acceptance, it was the realization that every avenue to the money had been sealed off. They only understood the language of loss when it was measured in dollars. I felt a final flicker of pity for their emptiness. They had forfeited a daughter worth $20 million, yet their hearts were still empty. I closed the chapter permanently. My life was no longer a reaction to their abandonment, but a proactive choice toward joy. The revenge wasn't in their defeat, it was in my profound, unshakable peace. I was free. Truly free. My new chapter had begun, not with a furious battle, but with a quiet, powerful declaration of independence. What did I choose to build on the foundation of Margaret's $20 million love? And how did I make sure that her kindness echoed long after the drama of Edward and Vanessa had faded? I returned to my work, finding power in the quiet routine. For years, my identity was framed by a question: why did they leave me? Now, the question had been definitively answered. They left because they were incapable of loving anything more than money. The trauma no longer defined me, my ability to thrive did. I edited the chaos out and inserted my own sense of order. With Mr. Jenkins' help, I dissolved the trust structure, simplifying the assets into the foundation. This move wasn't about avoiding taxes, it was about preventing any future legal loophole Edward or Vanessa might try to exploit. I wasn't just wealthy, I was impenetrable. I firmly established my boundaries. All communication attempts from the Sterlings were met with the immediate, cold efficiency of Mr. Jenkins' cease and desist letter. I refused to grant them another scene, another line of dialogue, in my story. I was Camilla Butler, Margaret's daughter, an identity built on choice, not a biological accident. The most fulfilling part of this entire journey was realizing that the best revenge is not retaliation, but replacement. I replaced their toxic vacuum with Margaret's enduring legacy. I replaced their selfishness with scholarship. I replaced their abandonment with belonging. My successful, peaceful life was the ultimate, uneditable final draft. I closed the ledger on Edward and Vanessa. Their final attempts, a desperate call from Edward's distant cousin, a social media comment from Vanessa, were simply deleted. They were noise. I chose silence. My self-assertion was complete. I was the author, the editor, and the publisher of my life, and their manuscript had been permanently rejected. I look back and see the path I took, not a victim's path, but a warrior's. The key pendant reminds me that while their actions initially defined my childhood, my response defined my adulthood. The choice, like the truth of family, is always yours. The drama of the Sterlings was over, but the quiet, powerful work of building a life based on chosen love had just begun. If you had the chance to rewrite the most painful chapter of your life, what new truth would you choose to write into the ending? The legal loss drove Edward and Vanessa insane. They didn't retreat, they escalated into public space. They created anonymous social media profiles, posting wild accusations that Margaret's money came from illegal sources. They even called me a gold-digging imposter. Their strategy was character assassination. I didn't panic. I reacted like the editor I was, surgically. I didn't engage with the madness. Mr. Jenkins' team, on retainer, immediately began documenting every slanderous post. Their digital noise was just further evidence of their malicious intent. I saw their hatred, but I felt nothing for them, only intellectual contempt. Mr. Jenkins issued a powerful legal counter. It wasn't just a cease and desist, it was a defamation warning citing the adoption finality and the wealth of evidence we had against them. The threat of financial ruin from a massive lawsuit finally silenced the public-facing attacks. Edward understood money, not morality. Their next move was to attack the dead. They leaked stories attempting to discredit Margaret, claiming her real estate empire was built on shady deals from decades ago. This attempt was the most despicable. Margaret was my true protector. Her reputation was the one thing I felt fiercely protective of. Margaret had anticipated this. Her records were impeccable. My response was not defensive. I simply accelerated the public launch of the Margaret Butler Foundation, emphasizing the absolute transparency and ethical sourcing of its capital. Good deeds are the best defense against bad words. I heard rumors from Edward's old firm. They were sinking into debt, selling off assets. Vanessa's piano teaching business had dried up due to the constant drama they created. They were not just losing the legal battle, they were losing their entire, carefully curated social standing. Their self-destruction was complete and self-inflicted. Mr. Jenkins implemented the final boundary, a restraining order against Edward and Vanessa, citing their harassment of my workplace and private residence. It was the final, definitive legal wall. I wasn't fighting them anymore, I was simply managing a persistent threat. I secured my perimeter with the strength of the law. The backlash eventually died down, not with repentance, but with exhaustion. I had achieved solitude. The chaos they brought was replaced by the structure of my work and the purpose of the foundation. I was immune to their bitterness. I had successfully edited them out of my narrative forever. Watching them destroy their own lives felt like the final, unintended consequence of Margaret's plan. I didn't cheer their downfall. There was only a quiet, hollow sadness for the relationship that never was. My victory was clean, but the truth of their smallness was just tragic. Detachment was my shield, but it wasn't easy to forge. The lesson here is crucial. When dealing with truly toxic people, you cannot win with emotion. You must win with strategy, law, and absolute emotional distance. Margaret gave me the armor, the money, and the legal documents. I supplied the discipline. Never let them pull you into their mud, stand on the high ground. I had successfully exiled them from my life, secured my future, and protected Margaret's legacy. But what became of Edward and Vanessa Sterling once the lawsuit threats and the restraining order finally silenced their last desperate screams for attention and money? The greatest gift of this entire ordeal was the deepening of my chosen family. Mr. Jenkins, who had been Margaret's confidant, became my anchor. I invited him and his wife for dinner. Over a quiet meal, I didn't discuss the drama, I discussed the future of the foundation. He was not just my lawyer, he was the keeper of Margaret's ethical flame. I realized how crucial it was to have expert, emotionally detached support when dealing with toxic people. Mr. Jenkins managed the malice and aggression so I could focus on my life. His professionalism shielded me. He showed me that you don't fight fire with fire, you extinguish it with cold, hard legal steel. Back at my editor's desk, the money became background noise. Not a defining feature. My passion for shaping stories returned with full force. My colleagues saw my focus, not my fortune. I deliberately maintained my professional life to prove that my success was driven by competence, not merely inheritance. The balance was key. I used Margaret's money to create a positive legacy through the foundation, while relying on my own career for validation. Money provided security, work provided worth. I learned that true financial freedom is not about how much you have, but about not needing it to define who you are. Even with the restraining order, I remained guarded. I understood their nature. They were like slow-moving, financial viruses, always looking for a new host. But they had run out of avenues. My life was now protected by a multi-layered defense system, legal, financial, and emotional. I was safe, but never complacent. Margaret's final gift was not the wealth, but the choice. The choice to stop being a victim, the choice to define my own family, and the choice to use my resources to build, not to brood. I chose peace over bitterness, purpose over pain, and the certainty of law over the chaos of emotion. With my past secured by law and my future guided by purpose, I found the true, unshakable freedom that money alone could never buy. What unexpected source of support finally helped you find your own balance after a major conflict in your life? With the legal skirmishes over, the silence was luxurious. I dedicated myself completely to my work as a senior editor. The structured, rational world of publishing was a perfect antidote to the chaos of my past. My professional success was no longer a distraction, it was the bedrock of my self-worth. I was building a life defined by merit, not millions. The true core of Margaret's $20 million was the foundation. I worked tirelessly with a small, trusted team to establish scholarship criteria for young writers from marginalized backgrounds. I wanted the money to create the opportunities Margaret gave me, a chance to rewrite a difficult narrative. It was turning a financial inheritance into a legacy of creative change. The first scholarship ceremony was profoundly emotional. Seeing the hope in the eyes of the young recipients, writers who just needed a chance, was the true payout. I realized Margaret's plan was never about revenge against my parents. It was about redemption for the broken girl they left behind. Edward and Vanessa chased wealth for superficial status. Margaret sought it for power and privacy, and used it for good. I inherited both the wealth and the lesson. My money was not for luxury. It was my buffer, my shield, and my tool for genuine, quiet impact. I redefined rich as being rich in purpose, not just assets. I spent a weekend methodically decluttering my apartment. I tossed old trinkets and papers, everything that carried the dust of the sterling years. It was a physical manifestation of the emotional separation. I was throwing out the past to make intentional space for the future I was actively creating. I learned to trust my solitude. The silence wasn't lonely, it was fertile. It allowed me to cultivate deep, authentic relationships with colleagues and friends who valued my mind, not my wallet. My network was built on mutual respect and shared interests, the opposite of the transactional emptiness of the Sterling family. My worth was self-validated. My journal became the only witness to my inner life. I didn't write about Edward or Vanessa. I wrote about my goals, my fears, and my gratitude for Margaret. I realized their power had entirely relied on my attention. By refusing to engage, I starved their toxicity and allowed my own growth to flourish. The biggest takeaway from any family revenge story is this: the revenge is rarely the satisfying confrontation. It's the moment you stop needing to fight. It's the profound, quiet realization that their opinion of you is irrelevant. My victory was not taking their money, it was successfully divorcing their narrative. Margaret had given me the key to a better life. It was up to me to use that key to unlock opportunity for others. The cycle of pain was broken. It was replaced with a cycle of purpose. I was Camilla Butler, and my story, finally, was all my own. And that, my friends, is true freedom. I would walk my path on my own terms, neither defined by their abandonment nor controlled by their reappearance. The choice, like so many in life, is yours to make. Sometimes our greatest growth comes from our deepest wounds. The story of abandonment and inheritance had found its true conclusion, not in the courtroom, but in the quiet, purposeful life I built. What is the most profound lesson you've learned about setting boundaries with family, and how has that enabled you to find your own purpose? Letting go wasn't an event, it was a process. The legal fight had drained the life out of their influence, but the residual bitterness lingered in my quiet moments. I had to face the quiet grief, the mourning for the parents I wished I had, not the ones who existed. I realized, true forgiveness is simply acknowledging they could never give what I needed. I found a box of old, saved letters and school reports, items I had kept from the Sterling years. I took them to Margaret's garden, built a small, controlled fire, and watched the paper turn to ash. It wasn't an act of anger, but of ritualistic release. I was burning the proof of a life I no longer needed to carry. Margaret's plan was brilliant because it forced me into action and gave me the legal tools to secure my self-worth. She didn't want to enrich me, she wanted to empower me. She knew that the only way to truly defeat toxic people is to become impervious to their attempts to re-enter your life. My life now consists of things Edward and Vanessa would never understand: quiet mornings with my books, meaningful conversations with friends, and the profound satisfaction of helping a young author get published through the foundation. I traded their superficial drama for genuine, complex contentment. The true revenge wasn't the 20 million, it was living the life they told me I couldn't have. It was proving their assessment of me, the awkward, timid girl, was utterly false. It was the silent, daily act of being a successful, happy, and well-adjusted adult, entirely separate from their influence. What is family? It is not merely a legal or biological contract. It is a vow of unconditional regard. My parents violated that vow. Margaret upheld it. My journey taught me that you can legally divorce toxic people, even if they share your DNA. Freedom is not the absence of trouble, it is the power to choose your response to trouble. I chose cold, strategic removal. That choice granted me peace. The Sterling's path would never materialize again. I walk mine on my own terms. I am the editor of my story, and they are permanently out of print. Standing in the garden that autumn evening, watching the last light fade from the sky, I felt Margaret's presence in the rustle of leaves. The key pendant still hung around my neck, a reminder that home is not where you are from, but where you are understood and valued. My parents believed they were discarding a responsibility. Instead, they helped me find my true self. That is the thing about abandonment. It can break you, or it can remake you into someone stronger than you ever imagined possible. The choice, like so many in life, is yours to make. Sometimes our greatest growth comes from our deepest wounds. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more authentic conversations about family resilience and finding your way forward after betrayal. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, you are never defined by those who leave, only by how you choose to continue. Goodbye for now. My story is proof that you can successfully write a happy ending, even after the most painful beginning. If you had to define your true family today, who would you choose to include? And what one lesson from your past would you finally choose to let go of? With the toxicity gone, space opened up for genuine connection. I met Liam, an architect, at a foundation fundraising event. He didn't know about the $20 million drama until months later, and when he learned, he treated it as background noise. He valued my mind, my work, and the resilience it took to rewrite my life, not the size of my bank account. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and transparent communication, the exact opposite of the emotional manipulation I grew up with. With Liam, there were no hidden agendas, no expectations tied to money, and no performance required. It was the first time in my life I felt seen and loved for the unedited version of myself. The Margaret Butler Foundation flourished. We expanded the scholarship program and began funding small, independent literary magazines that struggled for visibility. Every successful grant felt like a quiet, powerful victory against the small-minded selfishness of my biological parents. The money, now, was pure catalyst for good. I never let the wealth define my day-to-day. I continued to work as an editor, finding deep satisfaction in shaping narratives. My career was my anchor to the real world, proving that my worth was self-generated. I wore the title of Camilla Butler with pride, a name earned through resilience, not birthright. The absence of the Sterlings was not a void, it was peace. They were truly gone, relegated to the dusty footnote of a painful past. The restraining order held firm. No emails, no desperate phone calls, no ambush attempts. My life was finally a blank page, ready for the kind of rich, complex story I wanted to write. I understood Margaret's final, masterful lesson: money is not the goal, it is leverage. It is a tool for self-preservation and positive action. Edward and Vanessa saw it as an end. I saw it as a means to a beautiful, purposeful life. The $20 million bought me the definitive ending I needed, and the incredible beginning I deserved. Liam and I began traveling. These weren't the luxury, performative vacations Edward and Vanessa craved, they were quiet explorations, focused on history and culture. Each new stamp in my passport represented a victory over the small, claustrophobic world I once knew. My horizon was now limited only by my curiosity. I made sure Margaret's memory was honored not with statues, but with action. The Foundation's headquarters was established in one of her meticulously restored historical buildings. Every successful author or journalist we supported carried forward a piece of her independent spirit. Her legacy was self-made, and I ensured it would be self-sustaining. To anyone struggling with the shadow of a toxic past, remember that your revenge is not their suffering. It's your joy. Your power lies in your ability to redirect the pain into purpose. Don't waste energy on people who refuse to change. Build a life so beautiful and impenetrable that their absence is truly your greatest asset. My new beginning is everything they denied me: unconditional love, self-validated success, and profound peace. Thank you for letting me share the story of how an adopted daughter turned abandonment into $20 million and, more importantly, into a beautiful, meaningful life. This is Camilla Butler, signing off, the editor of her own destiny. If you are ready to rewrite your own story, hit that like button and subscribe. Share your moment of clarity in the comments below. What is the first chapter of your new beginning? My story is proof that you can successfully write a happy ending, even after the most painful beginning. If you had to define your true family today, who would you choose to include, and what one lesson from your past would you finally choose to let go of? I know many of you are watching because you've experienced betrayal, and maybe you felt invisible, just like I did for so many years. This story isn't just about the $20 million, it's a blueprint for regaining control. It's about taking the pen and rewriting the script of your own life. The biggest power move is realizing that toxic people rely on your attention for their existence. My greatest win was choosing silence and strategic distance. Remember, your worth is not a negotiable asset based on their approval. It is inherent. You are the editor, not the victim. So, if you're ready to start your own new beginning, hit that like button to spread the message of resilience. Subscribe for more stories about true family and boundary setting. Let me know in the comments, what is the first painful memory you are ready to finally edit out of your story? The story of abandonment and unexpected fortune ends here, but the conversation about resilience continues. What powerful boundary did you have to set with family to finally claim your own peace? I want to leave you with 5 non-negotiable truths from my journey. 1. Family is a choice, not a DNA chain. 2. The best revenge is impenetrable peace. 3. Use legal strategy, not emotional conflict. 4. Money is leverage, not validation. And the 5th, most important lesson, your greatest wound is your greatest purpose. Redirect that pain into building a life they can only watch from a distance. The choice to stop being a victim is the final edit. Tell me, which of these 5 lessons resonates most with your personal story? If you found the strength to rewrite your narrative, drop your number 1 takeaway in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and remember, you are the CEO of your own story. We are building a community of self-validated success. The story of abandonment and unexpected fortune ends here, but the conversation about resilience continues. What powerful boundary did you have to set with family to finally claim your own peace?